The following program is dedicated to the honor of the men and women who have served and of those who are currently serving with the Armed Forces of the United States military.
Live from the Veterans Radio Studio on the Ave Maria Network in Ann Arbor, Michigan, this is Veterans Radio. And now, here's your host for today's program, former CB, Gary Lilly.
Hey, good morning from Veterans Radio, Gary Lilly. July 1966, Vietnam, Republic of. And sitting with me right now is former 101st Airborne, former Big Red One, Bobby Gould.
Oh, thank you very much, Gary. Looking forward to the program today. I read the flyer. It's going to be very exciting.
It will be. It'll be Sarge Hack, wired together, going strong, successful. Well, this morning we've got a program, like I said, titled Sarge Hack, wired together, going strong, successful. This man was seriously wounded in Vietnam, but he had a pretty interesting life up to the point where he made it over there and has gone on to become an incredibly successful businessman. And I would like to this morning welcome Sarge Dave Hack. Good morning, Sarge. I told you guys, don't let me push buttons. Good morning, Sarge. Sir. Welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we got a picture of you. Pretty good-looking guy, man. Where were you born?
I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, April 21st, 1940.
When you went to school there, you already had family that had been in the military.
My oldest brother and second to the oldest brother had served in Korea during the Korean War in the United States Marine Corps.
What did they do?
They were in aviation. My oldest brother was a pilot and still is, and my second oldest brother was in office work in the 1st Air Wing with the United States Marine Corps.
Okay. One of them is since deceased?
The third oldest brother is deceased. His name was Lloyd Hack.
Was he in the military also?
No, he wasn't. He died at a very young age. He died at 54 years of age, and
I'm sorry to hear that. I thought one of the ones that serving in Korea had died.
No, sir.
Okay. Well,
no, sir.
Before you served in Vietnam, before you served in the Army, you served in the Coast Guard. Tell us about that, and why did you join the Coast Guard?
I had entered the Coast Guard immediately after high school in 1957. Felt that the Coast Guard was extremely challenging, and I still feel that way today. And served 4 years in the Coast Guard. 2 of the 4 years I stayed seasick. Was on ships. I had thought that the Coast Guard was, protecting the coast, but I was misled a little bit there. The Coast Guard travels all over the world in big ships.
Yeah, they'll throw.
And it was a rude awakening.
One of the hosts on producers on Veterans Radio's father was in the Coast Guard in World War II. He served on an LST that was eventually hit by a kamikaze off of Okinawa, so they do range a little ways away from our coast.
They most certainly do.
When I was in the military, we used to joke about the Coast Guard saying you had to be 6 feet tall in case your boat sunk so you could wade ashore.
I've heard that joke before, too.
I'm going to tell you something. I have since learned about the Coast Guard, and they're brave. I mean, my gosh, they go out when everybody else is in trouble.
That is a certified fact. They really do.
So God bless the Coast Guard. You guys are incredible, and brave. Sarge, how did you, what happened when you got out of the Coast Guard?
When I left the Coast Guard, I still liked the military. I most certainly enjoyed the time in the service, with the exception of spending a lot of time on the fantail, getting seasick. Fantail meaning the back of the ship.
Right.
And I went into private business, and that wasn't too successful for me.
What kind of business?
I owned a nightclub in Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
and ran that for, close to 4 years, about three years plus.
What years would those be?
1961 to 1964.
Okay, then I was never in it.
Yes, sir. And then I was in Phoenix, Arizona, and I was walking by this recruiting station, and the door was open, and this Army sergeant was sitting there, and he says, "Where you going?" And I says, "I don't know." He says, "What are you doing?" And I says, "I don't know." And he says, "Come here a minute, I want to talk to you."
He had a live one.
I'm serious. And so I went in, sat down, and he says, "How would you like to join the Army?" And I says, "I really hadn't thought about it, but I did enjoy the military." And he says, "Look," he says, "how would you like to join the Army Rangers?" And I says, "I've heard about those guys, and they don't go to sea, do they?" And he says, "No, they don't." And I says, "Well, sign me up." I enlisted at that time and went to Fort Ord, California. And
now tell me, how old were you at that time?
I was 24.
Okay. Well, you'd done a lot before you turned 24.
You betcha.
And how old were you when you enlisted in the Coast Guard?
I was 17.
Okay. You were legal.
Yes, I was. And with my parents' permission. And I went from Fort Ord to Fort Benning, Georgia, to the 1st Ranger Battalion. And there they says, "Ha-ha, you were in the Coast Guard." And I says, "Yeah." And they says, "The Coast Guard runs small boats, don't they?" And I says, "Yes." And he says, "We're going to send you to Eglin Air Force Base at the Army Ranger Camp." And I says, "Great." And I said, "What about my Ranger training?" And he said, "Don't worry about it. We'll train you there." And I said, "Oh, okay. That sounds like a winner." And so I went to Eglin Air Force Base, to the Jungle School, and I was there for 2 years, and running small boats and doing the training from the Army Rangers, and going into the back rivers, and then coming in from the Gulf of Mexico for the LCU and LCVP and the landing crafts and the rubber rafts. But I never went to school, and I kept asking my first sergeant. I said, "When are you guys going to send me to school?" And he says, "Well, you're OJT." And I says, "OJT? Yeah, on-the-job training." I says, "Gotcha." I says, "But I know that I need to go to school." And he said, "Don't worry about it. It's needs of the Army. Right now, we don't have time to send you to school. You're too busy." So I wrote a letter to the President of the United States at that time, Lyndon Baines Johnson, President Johnson, and I wrote a letter, and I said, "I've been down here 2 years. These guys are working my butt off, 24/7, and I need to go to school." And they says, "Well, forget it, And I wrote this President of the United States, and I says, I want to go to school." The letter came back through the channels, and the first sergeant called me in, and he says, "Hack, no one writes to the President of the United States in my command." He says, "Pack your bags, you're going to Newfoundland." From Florida.
Results, only not the ones you were looking for.
I says, "Get out of here." "No way, Jose." So off I went to Newfoundland. I was up there for 6 months. From Newfoundland, I went to, I was going to Vietnam, and my stepfather had passed away, and they reassigned me in Louisville, Kentucky, at the AFES, Armed Forces Examining Station, on a compassionate reassignment for a year. And then I went to Vietnam in 1968, during Tet.
During Tet, and you ended up at Live Cave right off the bat?
I went to Cameron Bay first. We flew into Cameron Bay. When we landed in Cameron Bay, I said, "Wow, man, this is like Hawaii," Everybody's running around with bathing suits and shower shoes, and there was no action whatsoever. And I thought, if this is Vietnam, this is great. The next day, they told all those guys to stand in formation, and we were all lined up. they called our names out, and they called my name out, and they says, you're going to the 1st Infantry Division. And I says, oh boy.
Big red one.
Big red one. And from there I went to Zion, the headquarters, and then from headquarters, after processing, I went to Like. And Like is the Michelin rubber plantation. And
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. It was a Michelin rubber plantation, and it was a very hot zone. It was right in the Iron Triangle, and it was the headquarters for the 1st Infantry Division.
Ty,
yes, sir.
keep a couple of those photographs of Like up there. You just showed the village itself, and now you've got a place called the Plaza.
Yes, sir.
I mean, this is like the shops of of America, the big right? It's like sort of like a United States shopping plaza.
Well, not exactly. It was a little primitive over there. But I put that site up on our webpage at uswings.com. I did that several years ago to help people. And we have received such a tremendous positive response from that, because a lot of guys, for one reason or another, their pictures that they had, if they had any, were destroyed.
Right.
So I put those pictures up, like I said, so guys could look at that and say, oh yeah, I can relate to that, no matter if they were at Like or any other part of Vietnam.
A village looked like a village up there.
Village is a village over there. And Vietnam was extremely primitive, and it has been a healing process for so many guys, and parents too. Right.
We're going to compress your service in Vietnam. We want to show a couple of pictures of some hooches that were yours, and a couple of 122 millimeter rocket near misses, and then one that where you got a hit on your bunker. Tell us what your job was and about those rockets.
Yeah, when I first went to Like, well, not exactly. When I first went to Zion in processing, of course, they had saw that I was with the 1st Ranger Battalion. They sent me to Like as a combat career counselor, and my job was going around throughout the whole division, flying in, flying out, and different base camps, counseling guys as far as what jobs that they were doing, what job they wanted to do, if they wanted to stay in the armed forces, re-enlisting them, if they wanted to go to school after they rotated back from Vietnam back to stateside, because things just didn't stop there. I was the counselor for the division headquarters as far as career counseling goes. And the CG, Major General Keith Ware, had heard about me. And he was a 2-star general and a real neat guy, just a nice person. And he had heard about me and asked me to come down to his office at Like and be interviewed for a position. And I did. And the job was NCOIC protocol. I would take care of all of the protocol activities that occurred with the 1st Infantry Division. And in doing so, actually my job was being his aide and also being his bodyguard. And that was my job with the CG. I was his bodyguard for maybe about 3.5 months.
How was it that you were wounded? You were wounded quite hard.
I was wounded twice. The first time I was wounded by a 122 millimeter rocket. That was at Like, and that was April the 10th, 1968. And then the second time I was wounded was Friday the 13th, September 1968. And I was on top of a armored personnel carrier, and the word for that particular vehicle is a track. And we received a direct hit from an RPG round.
What's the range of an RPG?
You know, it's not a great deal. I would say that 100 yards is really stretching it.
Really stretching it, yeah. So this was up close and personal.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like a 122 rocket shot in the general vicinity. This was the guy. He had something personally against you. Did you remember what it was?
I don't know. I always joked around and said someone said "shut up," and I thought they said "stand up." But a lot of those guys fired those things from spider hose. They would dig a fox hole, just enough room for them to stand in.
We got a half a minute left in this first segment, believe it or not. Okay. You were wounded. You were badly wounded. Do you remember anything during the time of your wounds? No, I was wounded in my leg, my face, my back, my shoulder, and my chest. And I spent a year in the hospital, and then I stayed on medical hold for five years. Were you unconscious? Yes, sir. Okay. We're coming up on a break. You're listening to Sarge Hack, who is a grunt, well, not a grunt, but who was wounded in Vietnam and came back and made a very successful life. And we're back on Veterans Radio talking to Sarge Hack. Did you ever know who the medic was that treated you? No, I don't. I did meet a medic in Vietnam that, I still remember his name. His name was Vaughn. And I had gotten stung by a scorpion. And I went over to the tent, and I told him what had happened, and that my leg was starting to swell up. And he said, Sergeant Hack, let's play some tonk. And I says, play tonk? And he says, yeah. So we put this 5-gallon gas can between us as a table, and we were sitting there playing. And I says, okay, Vaughn, what's going on? And he says, it's like this, Sarge. He says, sometimes a guy gets bit by a scorpion, dies. Sometimes a guy gets bit by a scorpion, just gets real sick. He says, I just wanted to make sure that you're not going to die on me. How old was he? Vaughn? Let's see. I guess he was probably about 20, 21 years old. Right. I got lost it when he said that. Well, this is what I was driving at. Oh, okay. Some medic who was 19, 20, 21 years old worked feverishly over you to save your life. And you don't know who he is. No. And I interviewed medics and corpsmen. Sometimes they were 19, 20, 21-year-old guys. They did things that trauma surgeons don't do. And they did them out in the field, saving guys' lives by stuffing cigarette filters in them and putting cigarette wrappers over sucking chest wounds and that. And they get very emotional at times. Oh yeah. And I said to a real close friend of mine, he was going through hard times, and I said, Doc, there are young men and women all around this country who would like to know who you are, so they could thank you for saving their daddy's life. Absolutely. Yep, and so you are a prime example of it. Yeah. You have children, do you? I do. And wouldn't they love to be able to see that medic and thank him? No doubt in my military mind. No question about it. The thing about it is, I woke up and I think it was Long Bend because they medevaced me out, and I woke up there, and then from there they transported me to Japan. I was at the 106 hospital in Japan, and then after Japan they stabilized me, and I was there for a couple weeks or so. I woke up in Japan. And I heard these guys talking in Japanese, and it was a TV. And I opened up my eyes, and it was Lloyd Bridges, and he was talking in Japanese. They were translating the TV show, right. Sea Hunt. I remember that when I was on Okinawa on R&R. I know. It freaked me out. And then from there, they medevaced me to they sent me to Fort Bragg. And here's something that really, really drove home. I'm going to Fort Bragg. My home is Louisville, Kentucky. Fort Knox is right outside of Louisville, Kentucky.
And I'm at Andrews Air Force Base, and they're refueling the hospital plane. And this colonel, he comes aboard the plane, and he says, any of you guys have any questions, concerns, or problems? And it's a hospital plane. And I raised my hand, and the colonel came back to me. He says, what's your problem? And I says, well, I'm going to Fort Bragg. I'm going to be a long-term patient. No question in my mind, because I was pretty well tore up. And I says, Fort Knox is right outside of Louisville, Kentucky. That's my home. This colonel called the Pentagon and took me off the plane.
Really?
He did.
And put me
on a plane and sent me to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And as they're doing this, he reaches down, he shakes my hand, and he says, welcome home. And I tell you what, that to me stuck in my mind, and it will always be there for the rest of my life. He says, welcome home.
First time I heard that was about 30 years later, when I finally joined Vietnam Veterans of America. At my first meeting, and I think I know who it was, but I'm not sure. The guy said to me, welcome home, and he put a bear hug on me.
Yeah.
We happened to be standing next to a table, and I put my left hand on that table, and it was that and his bear hug that kept me from falling. I got so dizzy at hearing those words and so emotional.
Extremely emotional. Extremely emotional.
Oh, what?
And what a meaning, because it's all sincere. It comes straight from the heart.
Right.
What a feeling, And, I always remembered that. I always carried that forward. And it was sincere. And this was in 1968. This is 2011. I still remember what the colonel looked like. Still remember his words. Still remember everything. And then, as I'm a patient there in Fort Knox at Ireland Army Hospital, all of us guys, that became a healing process for us.
Right.
Because we joked around and we compared war stories, and it helped us. It honestly helped us to go forward. And then these guys came around to my bed, and they came from the Department of the Army, and they says, Sergeant Hack, how would you like to be an Army recruiter? And I looked at him, I said, you guys are crazy. Me, a recruiter? There is no way, Jose. And I said, get out of here. And this one colonel, he says, no. He says, we want you to become an Army recruiter. And from there on out is all history, because I did become an Army recruiter.
We want to see a picture of your Jeep up there. If you would put that up, please, Matt. Your recruiting Jeep is enshrined in the museum
at Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
And that's only one of two Jeeps in there, is it?
There's one. General Patton's Jeep is at Fort Knox, and my Jeep is at the Pratt Museum. What had happened, the 101st Airborne Division came to me, and they says, Hack, we would like for you to recruit for the 101st Airborne Division, because we need men in Vietnam, bad. And I was the #1 recruiter out of 6,000 Army recruiters throughout the nation. And I said, okay, I'll do the deal, and I'll put the extra effort in for you. And I says, but how about giving me a Jeep? And this captain says,
you're a negotiator right from the start.
Yeah, I did. This captain says, he says, if we do this deal, it's got to be between us. So the captain brought the Jeep up from Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I met him in Columbus, Ohio. They signed the Jeep over to me, signed over the books, everything. I took the Jeep, took it to Akron, and then I painted it. Red, white, and blue, put mag wheels on it, wide tires, airborne on the front, airborne on the back, a white top, did the whole 9 yards, and really decked it out. And I used that Jeep for 3 years. Newsweek had done a story about me, and the commanding general heard about it, and he called the command sergeant major in, and he says, "Sergeant Major, I would like to have a Jeep done up just like that." The command sergeant major looked at the CG, and he says, "General, I got to tell you something." He says, "What's that?" He says, "That's our Jeep." And the CG says, "What?" He says, "That's our Jeep?" And he says, "Yes, that is our Jeep." So he says, "I want that Jeep down here now." So the CG called the USAREC CG, U.S. Army Recruiting Command CG, says, "What the blazes you guys doing with my Jeep? That's my Jeep." So anyway, to make the story short, the 101st Airborne Division CG took the Jeep back to Fort Campbell. They used it on tours for the 101st, and then afterwards they enshrined it into the Pratt Museum.
That's incredible. We're running out of time on this segment too. Mm-hmm. You had something to do with Muhammad Ali when you were recruiting?
I gave him the test. I gave Cassius Clay the Armed Forces test when I was at AFES in Louisville, Kentucky on a compassionate reassignment. Yes, sir. We
got a photograph up there now of you passing the word on to Top Sergeant. What was the word you were passing on?
That there was no way that he would ever have been drafted because he flunked the test.
And there's one of those stories behind the story.
Yes, sir.
There's another photograph of you swearing in a kid that volunteered to go to Vietnam.
Yes.
Now, I've got a personal reason for asking this. You ever think about these people that you recruited and what might have become of them?
After an awful lot of research of every person that I enlisted into the armed forces, 99.9 went into the Army and received trades. I lost only one applicant, and his name was Lewis, and he was killed in his sleep by a mortar round.
We're talking to Dave Hack, wired together, going strong, successful, and when we get back we're going to talk about his business and then a remarkable thing that he is doing on his own. We'll be right back. The reason why I said I had a personal reason for asking about, did you ever wonder, as Vietnam vets, we are invited in to talk to the high schools. Mm-hmm. Some of the teachers tell us that even after kids graduate, they ask if they can come back when the Vietnam veterans visit the class. I think we do a real good job. But then one day in the town of Chelsea, Michigan, we got word that a young boy had been killed over in Iraq, and it haunted me. Did we do anything that caused him to enlist? You know, it's a good thing if we did, but it's something that weighs on me. And you said you actually researched all the people that you recruited.
Yes, I did.
Astounding. And I guess you had, and you know how the one died that killed by a mortar.
Yes, I did. And like I said, the young man's name was Lewis, and I remember him very, very well, and I researched it, and he was killed in his sleep. He was with the 9th Infantry Division, and he was in personnel, and a mortar round came through the roof and killed him in his sleep. He was a good person, and the other men that enlisted with him all came back home and to Akron, Ohio. The neat thing about being a recruiter at that time in my life is that I gave it 110%. And I was extremely proud to serve my country. I was extremely proud of the men that I enlisted, and women. And like I said, there were over 6,000 Army recruiters, and I was the nation's #1 recruiter for 4 straight years. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and to me, I felt that by giving my all for my country and helping other men, that was the bottom line. Just plain and simple. It isn't. People misunderstand their true meaning. It really isn't what you do for yourself. It's what you do for others. That's what counts. It's what you do for others. And that's the way I've led my life, my 70 years. And by golly, that's the way it's going to be all the way up until the time that I punch out. It's what I can do for others.
And we're going to have a good example of that. We're going to be talking about it in a minute. And we're only going to be able to spend about a minute on U.S. Wings. Tell us about your business.
Our business is uswings.com. And we were the first company to go on the Internet. I'm a government contractor. I also I sell to the civilians. We're a bomber jacket manufacturer. We also sell Hawaiian shirts, but we do all kind of neat stuff. And we help an awful lot of people. We help a lot of Vietnam vets, and we reach out and do anything and everything that we can for our fellow man.
And how many hits do you get on your website?
Over 1 million a month.
1 million a month.
Over 1 million a month.
How many? How do you accomplish that?
Well, by being on the Internet for since 1986, 1994 when we first really formed our website. By owning over 200 URLs, and all of those 200 URLs pointing to uswings.com, and by being so well known and so well respected, a lot of people know about us.
It's astounding. That's how I discovered you. I don't remember exactly what I was looking for, but I went to ended up at uswings.com, and I saw the story on it, and I said, I got to talk to this guy. Called you from my mobile phone and sitting in my car in a parking lot, and that's where we talked.
Well, I'm glad you did. If you look on our website, you'll see a picture of myself and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen. And if you look on our website, you'll see me with a picture of General Wagner, which is the Lieutenant General in charge of Special Forces and the United States Army Rangers. That kind of association most certainly does not hurt U.S. Wings.
No.
It most certainly doesn't.
How many of your jackets do you sell?
Well, tens of thousands, because we supply all the armed forces.
Okay.
We supply the Coast Guard, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force. We also reach out and supply the New Zealand Air Force and the Australian Air Force. And we do about 99% of all the aviation movies, plus Civil Air Patrol, and the list just goes on.
And I see that we're showing one hand-painted Flying Tigers on the back of it. You've got somebody that actually hand-paints them for you.
Yes, sir. Our Flying Tigers jacket was worn by Dick Ross. He just passed away. Dick was the president of Flying Tigers, and he and Chenault formed the Flying Tigers, and that jacket is in the museum over in China, in the Flying Tigers Museum.
Really? Really? That's all right. Now tell us what you're doing for the vets with all your success. Something coming up.
We have a rally coming up the 21st of May, and it's the 50th anniversary rally, and
of which?
This is of Vietnam. I'm sorry.
Of the beginning of the Vietnam War.
Beginning of Vietnam, 1961, and we're kicking it off here in Hudson, Ohio. If you go to our website and look under U.S. Wings, and then go to the Vietnam Rally, it tells all about it, and we're extremely excited about it. And like I said, it's a kickoff for it. And it's something that is totally free, and it's open to the whole entire world. Now,
there's two big reunions that take place for Vietnam vets, one in Kokomo, Indiana, and one in Melbourne, Florida. There might be some over on the West Coast, but I've never heard of them, if there are. They are, you pay to get in or you pay for camping at least at Kokomo, and it's 20 acres, and it is filled up with campsites. You've got 27 acres, and you're opening it up.
Yes, sir, free.
And vendors.
Vendors is free.
Food.
Free.
Non-alcoholic beverages.
Pass on that. We do not drink here. We do not smoke here.
No, I said non-alcoholic beverages.
Right.
Yeah. Pass on. Well, you're supplying beverages?
We are.
Yep. Free.
Free.
I asked you, how long can somebody stay camped there? Because a lot of people will come in and set up camps. It looks like the Crusades with all the flags flying.
They can stay here a week.
1 week. So get there early, camp out, be with your brothers and your sisters.
You betcha.
What a time. What a time. It's easy to find your place.
It's extremely easy because we're right on the Ohio Turnpike. There's a map there. We're right between Akron, Ohio, and Cleveland. You can come in from Michigan, straight on the Turnpike. You can come in from New York, straight on the Turnpike. Or you can fly in at the Cleveland Hopkins Airport, or you can fly in at the Akron Canton. And we even have a private airport here over at Kent State, and that will accommodate jets.
And so it's going to be easy for anybody to get to. You are well positioned, and I have never heard of anybody doing this and footing the whole bill.
We are definitely flipping the whole entire bill.
All right, we got about 30 seconds left for you. Is there anything that you wanted to say that we didn't cover, Sarge?
I'd like to say something to all the veterans, no matter what branch of service, no matter what conflict or war. Welcome home.